At some point, most guitar players will venture into the world of songwriting. Whether this is writing songs for yourself just because you want to write them, or whether you're looking to release music and you actually want to write and release your own stuff, songwriting is a really fun, creative avenue to go down. But if you've never started writing songs before, it can be quite daunting and you might not know where to start. Now, one way we as guitar players can learn a lot about songwriting is to look at the way other people write songs, and we can learn a lot about chord progressions and structures from the way other great artists work. So in this video today, I'm actually going to be looking at some of the songwriting approaches used by Taylor Swift. Regardless of what most people's positive or negative opinion on Taylor Swift is, it's hard to deny the fact that she, as a songwriter and a musician, is currently leading the way and inspiring another generation of guitar players, and that can only be a positive thing. So as a songwriter, Taylor has a lot of pop sensibilities, but she draws a lot of influence from country as well. So in this video, I'm going to break down a few of the things that I've noticed in some of her big records, how she approaches this songwriting process, and some things you can take away as a songwriter from some of Taylor Swift's songs. So this video is brought to you in partnership with musicradar.com. Down below in the description, there's a link over to an article I've written to accompany this video over on the Music Radar website. That's got all the chord diagrams from everything we talk about in this video as well. So please go check that out too. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is Taylor Swift's approach to chords and the type of chords that she uses when writing songs. Now, the cool thing is, a lot of Taylor's songs are actually written just with really basic chords. So it doesn't really matter what ability level you are at guitar. As long as you know a few basic chords, you can play her songs or write songs using these ideas. Now, what you're going to see a lot in Taylor Swift songs is things like major and minor regular chords like C major, G major, A minor, E minor, D major, all of the usual suspects that you'd expect to see from an open chord. But then she's also going to be using a lot of bar chords as well, so things like B major, for instance, like a major bar chord, or a minor bar chord, like a C sharp minor. So pretty much your basic shapes. There are some instances in certain songs where she may substitute some of those chords for other things. So in one particular song in this lesson, I'm going to be using a C add 9, which is going to substitute for a C major, and I'm also going to be using a D sus 4 in the same song, which is going to substitute for a D major. Now, these substitutions you can use with those chords anyway, so you could use things like minor 7s, add 9s, sus 2 and sus 4 chords. These are just kind of adaptations of existing chords, and what you will find in Taylor Swift's music is a lot of the chords aren't that complicated, so you're not going to find crazy extended voices or really difficult shapes. You're pretty much going to find your standard open chord shapes and your simpler major and minor bar chord shapes, along with some things like dominant or minor 7s, the occasional add 9, and the occasional suspended chord. Nothing that is too crazy and too out there. So even though the chords are simple, it doesn't take away from the fact you can still write great songs with simple chords. Now, that's a very important lesson in itself, because as guitar players, as we all know, it's very easy to want to overcomplicate things, and we might want to throw some really difficult chord shapes or some really difficult extensions in there. But what we're then doing is we're actually cluttering up the song, and we're overcomplicating the song. And a lot of these songs that Taylor writes would not be the same if she was using extended voicings or more complex chord arrangements, because the simplicity is actually what creates that pop sensibility that makes her songs the catchy pop monster hits that they actually are. All right, so now that we've got the chords, we need to talk about the progressions and how to put these chords together. So all of the ideas that I talk about in this video are going to be in the major key, because a lot of Taylor's hits are in the major key. Now, I'm going to be talking about the chords intervallically. So there's a little bit of music theory involved here. If you've not learnt this music theory, you can still use some of these ideas, but I would definitely recommend learning the theory behind the major scale and the chords that fit to each note, because that's pretty much how we're going to be talking about this. Now, Taylor uses a lot of a progression known as a 1-4-5. Now, this is a very common progression of chords, because this is what is blues music. And the 1-4-5 chord has been used for loads of other stuff. It's been used in rock, it's been used in pop. It's a very, very common progression. The 1-4-5 is such a common progression that even without knowing the theory behind it, you've heard that progression hundreds of times in hundreds of songs. Now, the reason it's important to know that this is what Taylor does is because when you hear a song by Taylor Swift, or any other big artist for that matter, sometimes you get this feeling of already knowing the song, even if you've never heard the song before. And that is created by chord progressions. There are certain progressions that are familiar to us as listeners. And this is the reason why certain popular songs are popular, because they are familiar to us. You can hear one of her songs on the radio for the first time, and you'll always get that feeling that you've heard it before. And that's not because she's ripped anyone off, because I know that's what some people will think. It's really just about how the progressions make us feel. The resolutions of the chords inside the progression are things that we hear in other songs as well. So it makes us feel drawn to that song because it feels familiar to us. So the 145 is really important to know here, because it draws us back to that classic blues or classic country or classic rock feeling that we get from mega hits. So the 145 is going to be our kind of familiar home base. But what you're then going to find out about Taylor's guitar playing and her songwriting approach is that she then throws in a contrast chord, which is a minor chord from the same key. Now, in all of these particular instances, it's going to be the minor second, the minor third, or the minor sixth chord. So whichever one of these you put in will slightly change the feel of how the chords resolve together. So some of these will feel quite upbeat and poppy, some will feel quite ballady and downtempo. This is a really interesting approach because you've got that familiar resolution of the core major chords, and then this little contrast which kind of pulls the chord progression a different way. This is something you're going to use in your own songwriting when you're experimenting with different chord choices. The order you put the chords in and the chords you choose dictate how the progression feels to the listener. In one of these progressions, we're actually losing the 5 chord altogether and putting in the 3 chord as well, which is a slightly different approach, and that gives it, again, a different feel. We still have the 1 to the 4 resolution going on, but not to the 5. So it kind of loses that slightly bluesy thing. But what Taylor basically does is take a really simple progression, the idea of a 145, and then add a contrast chord, which is a minor chord, which is coming from the 2, the 3, or the 6 of the major scale. And there it is. That kind of is the Taylor Swift songwriting formula in a nutshell. So now I'm going to use that idea and that little bit of theory to break down 5 of her biggest hits, and we'll talk about how they sound. So the first song I'm going to look at is the track We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together. Now this one actually uses a 4 chord progression with 1 minor chord and 3 major chords, but it also actually has some chord substitutions that I talked about at the start of the video. So this one is in the key of G, but we're actually starting with a C chord, but it's a C add 9 chord. That's the 4th degree of the scale. The C is the 4 chord. That goes to the G, which is the 1 chord. That then goes to the D sus4, which is the 5 chord. But we're adding that sus4 note instead of just a regular D. We're suspending the top note. And that goes into an E minor, which is the 6 chord. So it's 4, 1, 5, 6. It's still that same 4 chord progression. The 1, 4, and 5 are still there, just in a different order, with the minor 6 chord. Goes C add 9 to G, D sus4 to E minor. If you've heard the original track, you'll know that chord progression is actually arpeggiated. The second track I want to talk about is using exactly the same chord progression. So 4, 1, 5, 6. This is in a different key though. This is in the key of E major. This is the track Antihero. So this one starts with the A chord, which is the 4 of the key of E major. That then goes to the 1 chord, which is the E major itself. Then we're going to the 5 chord, which is the B major. And then the 6 chord, which is the C sharp minor. So we've got that exact same thing. We've got 3 major chords, 4, 1, 5, and then the minor 6 to go at the end. Now, the really interesting thing is those two songs use exactly the same intervallic progression. So 4, 1, 5, 6, 3 major chords followed by a minor chord. They're in different keys and they also sound completely different. And that's because the way you use the chords is also a big part of this. So before we look at more songs, I just want to reiterate the importance of that. Just because you have a song with the same chord progression as another song, it doesn't mean it's going to sound the same. It's how you use the chords and the rhythms that you apply to those chords that make the song what it is. The chord progression is a great way to get started with the idea. So if you're a big fan of Taylor Swift and you want to write songs in that vein, that is a great chord progression to use. Whatever key you play it in and whatever rhythmic variation you put on that chord progression, that's a really good place to start with that idea. So the third progression I want to show you is from the track Back to December. This is in the key of D major, and this one is actually a 1, 6, 4, 5. This is the progression from the verse of the song. So because it's in the key of D, the 1 chord is a D major, the 6 chord is a B minor, the 4 chord is a G, and the 5 chord is an A. So this one goes 1, 6, 4, 5. So we're going straight to that minor 6 on the second chord before going back to the 4 and 5. Now on the 5 chord bar, we're actually doing the first half of the bar as the D chord, which is the 1 chord. So there's a little bit of a 1 to 5 turnaround there as well. It goes like this. So you can see by putting that minor 6 chord second, the progression actually has a slightly more ballady feel. Whereas when we had the minor 6 at the end and we started with the 4 chord, the overall progression has a bit more of an upbeat pop track kind of vibe. Alright, so the next track I'm going to talk about has a different progression. This is a 1, 3, 6, 4 progression. This is from the track Cruel Summer. Now you'll notice I've got a capo on the 2nd fret for this one. This is in the key of G major with the capo. So the 1 chord is going to be the G. The 3 chord is going to be the B minor. Then I've got the 6 chord, which is an E minor, and the 4 chord, which is a C. So this progression is a little bit different because it doesn't have the 5 chord, so we actually lose that familiar bluesy country sound now, and this is a bit more of a modern Taylor Swift chord progression. So the 1, 3, 6, 4 is a really cool pop progression that has a bit of a moody character to it. I think the double minor in that really helps. Because you really feel it dropping there. You kind of go into this sort of more somber feel and then you land on the final 4 chord, which kind of brings us back to the upbeat feel. And that resolves really nicely back to the 1. So that's a bit different if you don't want your song to sound bluesy or you don't want it to sound more like a ballad. That's a really good chord progression. You can get a little bit moody with it, and you could almost play something ballady by playing something slow with that, but it can also conversely be used to play quite an upbeat song like the one we've just talked about. And the final one we're going to talk about is the track August. This has got the capo on the 3rd fret, and this is in the key of D major with the capo. This is a 1, 4, 2, 5 progression. So we're back to that 1, 4, 5 feel, but this time instead of the minor 6, we've got the minor 2 in there. So with this being in the key of D, the 1st chord is the D major, the 4 chord is the G, the 2 chord is the E minor, and the 5 chord is the A. So kind of like the progressions at the start of this video, they have that familiar 1, 4, 5 idea there, which instantly roots us back to blues, but we've got that minor 2 in there as well. It sounds like this. I think that minor 2 being in there instead of a minor 6 still makes it quite ballady, but it gives it a slightly different ballady feel, or at least in the context of how Taylor used it in that particular song. Now, the big takeaway from all of this is that you can use really common and really simple chords with really common and really simple chord progressions and write great songs with them. You don't have to be using crazy chord voicings and really obscure chord progressions to write great songs. All of these songs use 1 and 4 chords, which we're very accustomed to in Western music. We're very used to the 1 and 4 resolution. And then also, they contain a lot of 5 chords, which again, we're used to if we've heard a lot of blues and rock. And then the minor 2, the minor 6, and the minor 3 are all part of our existing major scale. So everything we're hearing in these songs is stuff that we're already so accustomed to. And that, again, is one reason why when you hear a Taylor Swift song on the radio or any other big artist, these progressions sound familiar to us because we've heard these progressions in loads of songs, even though we've never heard them played this particular way, because each artist will interpret those chord progressions in a different way, which is how you're going to use this. But the progressions are familiar and the resolutions are familiar. And that's the important thing to remember as a songwriter is you want to create something that makes people feel like they already know it. So if you're getting into songwriting and you want to write some songs in the style of Taylor Swift, or just use some of Taylor's ideas to write your own songs, you can use these progressions to get you started. Let me know down below in the comments what you guys have done with these progressions. If you've written any songs with them, I'd love to hear how you've used this and what approach you took with the ideas in this lesson. Don't forget to check out the link in the description as well, which will take you over to the Music Radar website. You can see the article which contains all of this stuff that I've talked about in this lesson written out in full. Thank you guys so much for watching as always. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy, let me know in the comments, hit the like button, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing as well. Thank you guys as always, and I'll see you very soon.